yet, and he's next in command with my organization. He is the president, I'm the chairman. I'm speaking about none other than Brother Truss Graham. We have with us Professor Mackey. I've heard Professor Mackey speak several times, and both of us have appeared in WLIB and also at the Slave, and I must say that he's quite a treat. But to allow him a little opportunity, excuse me, to try to speak to a few more people, I'm going to, not ad-lib, but I'm going to say a few words so that he wouldn't have to travel and speak to a very small amount of people. Hopefully we'll have some more people. I decided that this evening I was going to play a small role and let my lieutenant, Brother Truss, get the type of exposure that I believe, that I know he deserves. Everyone is speaking about who is going to replace the Dr. Clarks, the Dr. Benz, and I have been for several years with study groups from as early as 1982 with Sons and Daughters of the Sun, with branches in Hempstead, Long Island, Central Islip, both in Long Island. One we have presently at the bookstore, 604 Flatbush Avenue, with Brother Truss, my lieutenant. He teaches every Tuesday night from 7 to 10. So if any of you would like to study your history, or you have friends living in the area and wish to look to go to a study group, you could always tell them about Head Start Bookstore, 604 Flatbush Avenue. From Manhattan, you take the D train and you ride at the front of the train, get off at Prospect Park, walk down Lincoln Place, just one short block, 2 blocks to your right, and you'll come to the bookstore. Right now, every Sunday, I am teaching at Mackey Institute. That's a black school in New Brunswick, New Jersey, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. with a study group. People come from as far as Philadelphia, Camden, Newark, Long Island, Queens, Manhattan, and we all gather there on Sunday. Every Sunday, rain, sleet, or snow. And we have the study classes there. That's where I'm at. I'm saying to you that tonight, when you hear Dr. Mackey, Professor Mackey, you're going to leave being thrilled. When you hear Brother Truss, you're going to see what some people call my disciple. And I'm proud of Brother Truss because with my guidance and his hard work in researching and studying, he has grown tremendously. He understands what it is and what's necessary, especially in times like now when the white power structure is coming down and what is perceived as our leadership. When you challenge the white power structure, you have to be able to have your facts historically, because there is no way you could go up against a mighty nation of people with all their professors, institutions, owning the system that you study and make your living under, and think that you could go up there just speaking how you feel.
Well,
am I right?
All right, amen, go right there.
It is not how you feel that gets it. It is what you know and how you could present the facts as they are. I was thinking about how now we have Sister Soldier and the hot seat on the front line, but I'm happy. You might not be, but I am. I'm happy because the white society, the system, have just picked on the wrong young black sister.
Oh, yes. All right, tell it.
And when that happens, it's a blessing.
Well,
because they permit us to always stay fresh, alive in the struggle.
yes.
You know, when things are going nice, and there's no controversy, we kind of lay back
Think about it.
and believe that everything is great, that white people have changed, that they have now become our friends. You don't know this, but I'm going to tell you this. Those of you who heard me last night at the Slave for the few minutes that I had, one young man said after the end, he said, Professor Simmons, had you said, let's take it to the street, you would have emptied the Slave Theater. Now, that's how he saw it. And then maybe that's how other people saw it. Let me tell you how the owner saw it. And I'm speaking about Judge Phillips. In the back, there was rumor that the slave was given to UAM because it was announced at the program last night that the slave is now being given to UAM. So when I heard that, I was shocked. And the judge, the owner, he was right there. So a friend of mine who knows him very well went over to ask him, was that true? So then he called me over and asked me to tell the judge what I heard. So I said, well, I heard that you give the slave to UAM. He said, I've not given it to anyone. As a matter of fact, he's getting ready to open up another slave too, so he could have 2 movie houses. He said that racism is being taught or lectured in the slave. He said, I heard someone mention, now he didn't see the someone, I guess because in the back where he was, you have that little speaking system there. And he said, they made a remark that if every white person died, they would be happy or something to that effect. Not knowing that I was the one who said it. So I said, I am the one who said it, because I felt that it was only fair for me to let him know who said it, so that he doesn't hold UAM responsible for the remarks. He said, are you telling me that there are no good white people? Well, as a judge, I guess he must see some good white folks. He is entitled to see them. But his eyes are not my eyes.
Well.
And then I said to him, Judge, would you say that one white person is the white race? He says, no. I says, well, I have a theory, a concept that I call the chain concept. That is, each link is a part of that chain. And so if you took 10,000 links to form a chain, and one link drops on your foot, is that not the chain? Or is it a link? He says, do you use that same concept when speaking about black people too? I said, I sure do. That's a concept that I have found to be foolproof, where there is no white man in the world could escape it. You know, they have a way of saying, well, it wasn't me, it wasn't us. It was our grandparents and our great-grandparents. So I say, well, okay, let's say that's so. It's not you. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt just for conversation. Were you not once a part of your parents? Did your parents not once used to walk with you as a seed, as a sperm? I'm speaking about your mothers and fathers. And are they not the continuation of they, or your grandparents, which would be their parents? Were they not once a sperm or a seed? And so you could take it back, and it ends up being the same people. I often say to my son Reggie over there, standing, that I want him to understand that they are not children of mine. They are me. They are extensions of me. Although they are now separate entities unto themselves, they are still nothing but mere extensions of me. For at one time I had Reggie within my body.
Well.
And there is no part of me that is all me. If you cut off a finger, one of my fingers, and it's there on the floor, that's still me. That's as much me as the rest of me standing here before you.
All right now. Teach.
So when I look at my so-called children, for a better word, I look at myself. That's why mothers suffer when the kids get hurt or go to jail.
Go right there. Yep.
Because that part is actually part of them, whether they know it or not. And so when you hold white people into the chain concept as a link to the chain, they don't have to do it as an individual, but they have done it as part of the whole. They understand that very well, and they do that to us.
Well.
They hold black people responsible for what any black individual have done. We are the only ones who want individualism. But understand this. I don't blame white people either. If I were a white man, and I had all of this that you see, the world at my fingertip, the reason why I could go to Las Vegas or Atlantic City and lose $40,000, $50,000 in one day and could come home and sleep, because as quick as I lost it, I have made twice that much. And when it comes at the expense of others, then why should I want others to wake up? Remember, there was a saying about the Chinese. Right. Let the sleeping giant sleep. Never wake him up.
Well.
And as long as you were sleeping, as long as you did not understand your relationship to your mother, which is Africa, you were a very good nigger. You could be lynched, tarred, and feathered.
Think about it.
But the white men have come to understand that he could buy off some of us who are willing to forgive. But I'm not a forgiver.
All right now.
Because I work on the level of God. With everything I do at the level of God. If God created the world and everything in it, there is nothing that could be here that he did not create. At least that's what I was taught.
Well.
And if the devil is here as a result of being created by God, he didn't create himself now.
All right.
So don't blame the devil. If you say he did, then you can't think. You need to go to the cemetery, dig your hole, and bury yourself. If anyone created the world and everything in it, that includes AIDS and everything else that is in it. Nothing could be here without that person wanting it to be here. So I simply ask the question, what is the role of a devil or the devil? Is it to be good or to be bad? And you must agree that it is to be bad. So then the devil is never acting out of concert. He's never acting out of the role that he was permitted or placed here to do.
Well.
So don't blame him that's too deep for you because you know that the ceiling will fall on your head tonight, and you certainly won't live past tomorrow if you were to use your faculties in which you were given to think. And so when I look at the fact that the white man was placed here to do what he is doing, since God created him as well as he created me, I understand then that when anything devilish is being done to you, it is your responsibility to remove that what? That devilishness. So white people is aware that Mother Africa is there with all its wealth, with all its riches, with all its minerals. And if you are too blind, if you are too dumb, too silly to see it and not want it, the white man feels he has a right to take it and keep it. Now, I hope that at some time in the near future, Brother Harris, who went to Namibia and met with the president in Juma, will be showing you a tape as to where the president said that Namibia belonged to you like it is to him, and why don't the black American prepare himself to come and make money from Namibia, just like white folks are getting rich from Namibia. So I am going to stop at this juncture. I told you I was just going to bite a little time and let Sister Reverend Kennedy come up and make some announcements. And then I see Brother Truss, my able lieutenant, is here. And like I said, I want them, he and Brother Mackey, to be able to have as much time as they wish to express themselves to you. So Sister Kennedy.
Hotep to the family, and moving right along, we're going to do the announcements. We want everybody to remember that as we...
I'm just here to be, of course, the MC. But the one person that I want the public to hear and learn about is this brother. You might call him my protege, he might consider himself my protege, but I'll tell you, he did a lot of this on his own. And I want for you to hear the man next to me. In case I die, sons and daughters will be in his hands. And I'm speaking but none other than Brother Truss Graham. Come on, Truss, and do your thing.
First, I want to do this in the traditional African way. Professor Simmons, Professor Mackey, Sister, do I have the permission to speak?
Sure do.
Thank you. That's keeping with the very traditions of our particular background, but most of all, to give respect, reverence, and honor where respect, reverence, and honor is due. First I want to do is thank the Temple Now congregation for giving me this opportunity to be before you this evening. I also want to thank the ancestors for giving me my life to be here. I want to thank my mother and my father for giving me this also opportunity to be before you, but most of all, I want to give a great deal of credit to Professor Simmons and Dr. Ben and guys like, excuse me, and individuals like Professor Mackey, who actually paved the way for myself in various areas to give me the enthusiasm and the determination to work in these particular areas that become very tedious at times, but most of all, become very instrumental. I'd like to say a few things first about myself, and then we'll go into the subject matter. I'm a representative of Sons and Daughters of the Sun. It's a historical society that actually bases its background in the research and the examination of historical documentation. And pretty much we concentrate directly in African history, but we actually generalize in world history, comparative religions, anthropology, archaeology, and various sciences. But our major concern is to give people the equipment, the basic skills of research and study so that we could become more efficient and proficient in our ability to evaluate, examine, decipher, and discern information a bit more clearly. Because what I do find from working in a bookstore, I do work in one of the largest African-oriented bookstores in the city. I'm pretty sure a lot of people here are familiar with it. It's called Head Start. It's located on Flatbush Avenue, 604. We actually look at ourselves pretty much not as a bookstore, but as a community institution. And we provide particular services for the community that establishes what I would call a good, firm foundation in various areas pertaining to cultural values, educational, academics, but most of all, giving us a clearer and a better understanding on how to evaluate and to examine information. The organization directly has been geared towards setting up study groups, and one of the primary focuses of study groups is to actually go through with an intense, perseverance of defining and examining information, but most of all to give us, as I said before, the skills of how to research and study, which I find a lot of us really don't have. I think that there has been a resurgence in the reading of material, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of us now has come familiar, or I would say 360 degrees, to the familiarity of a major degree of books that are now out in the major stream or mainstream availability in the marketplace that we can, make ourselves available to. Yeah. But one thing I do find out is that we are not consuming the information properly. And I do find out that one of the instrumental factors is our ability to consume, evaluate, define, and cross-reference information with a fine-tooth comb. We are pretty much, regurgitators. That means we read and we regurgitate what we read. Versus being able to analyze versus various points of view about a subject matter and come up with a balanced, logical, pragmatic, sound conclusion. And what I find out is that we have been lacking those skills. So what we as an organization try to emphasize with a great deal of, enthusiasm, and that is to provide one with these skills of what I would call detail when it comes down to research and study. My familiarity with these areas of concentration, as I said, has been with Professor George E. Simmons. I look at him as my father, my mentor, but most of all, my guiding light when it comes down to looking forward about coming to grips with how I see information from various points of view, and knowing and understanding that your point of view is not the only point of view. A lot of us are romantically emotional with African-centered perspectives. That means that just because it's African, we think that's the way it goes. Or once we provide ourselves with a certain amount of information, we think that the whole world is African, and that's not the way it works. And we have to come to grips with the realities that are in front of us, but most of all, to give a balanced, accurate approach about what the information has to offer. And I fail to realize, based on the information that we have available, that we're not doing this. What we are doing is just regurgitating information. And I'll at least give you an example of what that is based on the information that you already have. I'm pretty sure that we have, crossed upon certain areas like the origin of man. I'm pretty sure everybody in this room knows the origin of man comes from Africa. I don't think that there's nobody in this room that would disagree with me on that point.
Well,
it's enough to clap, but it's enough. The most important thing is to know who found it, what the particulars are, the details of the information, and what it has to offer for us. Does anybody in this room know who found the oldest remains in the world? Anybody care to deal with that question? Excuse me? Somebody said Leakey. And she said someone recently. And what that, she said it was Eve. And what I'm going to do is give you a little background on that to show you the variations of how you can take information and run with it and not really understand the value of the information. First of all, how many people ever read anthropology? Anybody in here? Archaeology? Right. Well, you will find out, if you ever read in those areas, you will find out that Louis B. Leakey never found anything of significant value. That's basic, anthropological fact. That means all the material that was found by his excavation team pretty much were found by the Africans, but the significant finds that were made in his excavation team was found by Mary Leakey, his wife, and found by Richard Leakey, his son. Louis B. Leakey himself never made a significant major find. That's not to say he didn't find anything, but what I'm saying is when you talk about anthropology, significant finds of major magnitude actually turn the scientific field upside down on its head. And you'll begin to realize that if you're not clear about the details of the information, it is easy for you to go out and make statements and be very, very, upset that those statements are incorrect. That's because we go to lectures and we hear things based on bits and pieces of information and never go back and evaluate with a fine-tooth comb. That means follow-up research about these particular, statements that have been made and giving yourself a better and a more clearer understanding of it. I'm pretty sure everybody is familiar with Lucy, the finds that are recognized as the oldest finds in the world. Dr. Ben has a new name for her, which I would, at this particular time cannot recall, but it's a name that is more befitting based on her geographical area and her cultural background. But in this case, what you'll find out is that the oldest remains in the world were found by Donald Johanson. They were found in the Afar Valley in Ethiopia. They're actually between 3.2 million years old and between 4 million years old. And you'll find out that that information is not shut tight in no vault nowhere. You can go to any book and read it, and it is readily available in all the major scientific journals pertaining to these areas of research. But the most important thing is, if we don't make ourselves available to certain types of outlets when it comes down to information, we will never be privy to the information. So therefore, when we look at certain information, we will take it and run with it without really discerning the very technical details about what the information really has to offer. I'm pretty sure people in here are familiar with Cheikh Anta Diop. Cheikh Anta Diop, the great renowned physicist and anthropologist, but most of all, one of our great cultural historians coming out of Senegal, West Africa, who actually geared himself toward anthropology. How many people have read Cheikh Anta Diop's last book, which was called Civilization and Barbarism, which is one of what we would call a very rigorous, evaluation of anthropological cross-references pertaining to the development of humankind. And out of that book is a clear example of being able to look at the parallels between newfound information, that means technological and scientific breakthroughs on a consistent basis, and then information that has been set down based on theory to processes of development. And what I mean by that is this, is that if you read Cheikh Anta Diop, I'm pretty sure you would know that the origin, based on his particular conceptual theory, that the origin of humankind came out of Africa. And then from the beginning out of Africa came next. Anybody know what came next? What race came next? Well, I guess, excuse me? Caucasian. And that's what Cheikh Anta Diop says, that originally first there was the African, and then there was a mutational, or what they would call a breakdown, a biological deficiency in the very chromosomes or the development of the genome of this particular species. And then you had the development of white people. And then out of white people, with the amalgamation and the miscegenation between white and African, we get what is now today represented as the Mongoloid or the Chinese or the Oriental individual. How many people read that? Anybody in here read that? Well, how many people know that it don't hold too much water right now? Right. Well, the thing is that a lot of us ain't been saying that. And the reason that is because we take Cheikh Anta Diop hook, line, and sinker without even evaluating the material. And it takes a degree of what I would call, background in the information, but most of all, it takes time to really research this type of material. We think we can read a book and we'll have it overnight. There was a situation that happened in Jersey pertaining to individuals, putting all their information in one book. And a scholar came up with, Africans have a very serious problem of what is called monobibliosis. It's called one bookitis. That we can solve all our problems out of one book, or that we have one particular point of view and it will substantiate all our ills, no matter what they might be. One thing I would like to do, because, as I said in the beginning, one problem was I did have a little problem getting here. The traffic was kind of, strong, and it inhibited me from getting here on time. But one thing that I do want to touch on is some of the areas of, concentration pertaining to our organization in the areas of, historical evaluation. What we do is we give study groups, but we also give outings, and we also give book parties. And most of all, we try to give people an alternative means of education that is via the mainstream educational forums that you go to and pay big money for. But we're going to give you the same, what I would call basic skills, but at least give you the skills of what I think is the most important, and that is how to think. And a lot of us, I think, when we do read information, we are not thinking as intense as we possibly can. And in this case, what we do is we go through these techniques and these methodologies, procedures to qualify us with the necessary skills. I want to briefly talk about some outings that we had pertaining to Nubia. I wanted to talk extensively about Nubia and world imperialism. It seems kind of funny that those two topics would be brought together at this, at this particular time. But I think one reason that it has to be brought out is because, as I said before, we have been romanticizing with Egypt just a little bit too much, to the point where that we have to start looking at Egypt with a more critical eye, to the point where that we can get a better understanding on what Egypt has to offer versus all of the rest of Africa. Africa is 12 million square miles of land mass, and at this present time there are anywhere from 600 to at least 800 million people on the continent. And it's important to understand that you have various cultural differences based on geographical areas that are conflicting and at times are, complementary to each other. So when we look at Africa, you cannot look at Africa as just a monolithic entity, the way we in the Western world looks at Africa versus the way Africans looked at themselves. And it's very important that we take things based on the realities and try to bring some continuity to them. And the only way that can be done is if we have a good grasp of the historical material and also a good grasp of the current events that take place on a consistent level in Africa right now. What I mean by that is that a lot of us now, as you can see, we are dressed in our African attire to actually signify and define our particular link and relationship with Africa. But I'm pretty sure you'll be aware, for anybody who's in this room that been to Africa, will find out that contemporary Africa is a lot different. That means that as soon as you step off the plane, they want 501 jeans and Nike sneakers. And a lot of us don't come to grips with the realities of what that really is until you step inside of Africa and see the realities. And in this case, what we are talking about are the realities. Nubia and imperialism. I got about 5 or 10 minutes to wrap this up, but I'm going to talk about some things, and then eventually, whether it be at this particular forum or at the Sons and Daughters of the Sun study groups on Sunday that we have at New Brunswick, New Jersey, 184 Commercial Street, or Tuesday night, 7:30 to 10 at Head Start Books and Crafts, where I can go into a little bit more detail about this subject matter. I did quite a bit of research on it. I found some very intriguing information that will bring about a change in your whole atmosphere pertaining to Egypt and Nubians versus how we look at them from a very romantic perspective. And I think that's very important. One reason is because, whether you know it or not, Nubians were pretty much the footstools of the Egyptians. And it's very hard for us to really look at these things with a clear perspective, and one reason is because the majority of the material has been evaluated and interpreted by foreign individuals. But based on my own discussion of the information, I find out that there was a serious conflict of interest between the Nubians and the Egyptians. Now, by the way, let me just explain. Nubians and Egyptians are of the same stock of people. That means that they are all Africans, just like we are all Africans in this room. But because of geographical positioning, cultural differences, there were variations of conflicting, abrasive relationships, and then also, harmonious and complementary relationships. But out of the history from which I have previously read and did research on, the majority of the time, the relationship was pretty much at conflict. That means that the majority of the times the Egyptians were doing good. That would actually designate the periods of the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The Nubians were doing bad. And during the periods of when the Egyptians were doing good, when the Egyptians were doing bad, which was the intermediate periods or the destabilization periods in between those good periods, those are the periods when the Nubians were doing good. Now, the reason that we look at Egypt in this perspective from a different light, from an imperialistic perspective, was to take into consideration when I start looking at the infrastructure of Egypt and began to look and notice that the very foundation of the infrastructure was not indigenous to Egypt.
All right.
That means the gold that you've seen in Egypt didn't come from Egypt.
Well,
the diorite from Egypt did not come from Egypt. The copper from Egypt did not come from Egypt. The iron from Egypt did not come from Egypt. The bronze did not come from Egypt. The man labor, it did not come from Egypt. The animal resources did not come from Egypt. And in this case, the mineral resources, when we talked about the gold, did not come from Egypt. So it was imperative that the Egyptians go outside their immediate district and to actually consume some of these particular products. And in the beginning, it was based on a complementary relationship. It was based on trade. There were 3 stages of this particular relationship. They call it the trading stage, the raiding stage, and then the colonization stage.
All right.
And it's very important that we realize this, whether we look at it through the inscriptions of the documentation coming from the Meduneter or from the hieroglyph, or whether we look at it from the cuneiforms that we see on the tombs and the temple walls, you will begin to find out that there's something peculiarly different in reference to Nubians and their positioning in society. The majority of the time, Nubians are always in chains. They're always under somebody's foot. And when they are in a unique position, it is because they are at the behest of those individuals who are in power-broking positions. That means individuals who take upon, Africans or individuals from the interior as being consorts to power-broking positions. So when you think of a sister like Akmos Nefertari, she was taken from the southern region as being a consort to Amenhotep the first or Amenhotep the first, whatever name you decide to call it. But in this case, what we're talking about is looking at Nubians in a very clear perspective. And you'll find out that the relationships and the friends that the Nubians had were very different than the friends that the Egyptians had.
Wow.
So when I think of the first, or should I say in this case, the second intermediate period, or the first destabilization of Egypt from a foreign invader, we talk about the Hyksos. And I'm pretty sure when Dr. Ben talks about the Hyksos, a lot of us get upset. One reason is because there's this significant attachment between Hyksos and Jews, and this particular attachment between foreigners coming into Egypt. But one thing I want to take time to acknowledge is that the relationship between the Hyksos and the Nubians were very different. The Hyksos and the Nubian had a very harmonious relationship. And matter of fact, when the Nubians were trading and doing very good commerce with Hyksos, it's when the Egyptians, or when the Egyptian central government was at a fall or at a standstill. And at this time, any time when you see a destabilization in Egypt, whether it be the 20th or the 21st dynasty up to the 24th with the Libyans, whether it be the Hyksos, or either whether it be during the major first intermediate period from the 6th dynasty up into the 11th, we find that the relationships between Nubians and outside sources beyond Egypt become a little bit more harmonious than those in which the Egyptians have taken place. One of the serious events that took place pertaining to this particular relationship was an event that took place at the end of the 17th dynasty and the beginning of the 18th dynasty. What that particular time period has, and I know I have just a few more minutes.
No, you have no more time, I'm sorry.
And what it represents is that during this period of time of the end of the 17th and the 18th dynasty, Akmos was at the, Kamos was at the present time deciding that he was going to get rid of all the Hyksos. He was going to throw all foreigners out of Egypt. And that it was his main objective to do this. But when he decided to set a military campaign against the preceding government that was already established, he found out that he would have problems. When Apophis, who was the Hyksos king at the time, decided that he would need more troops in order to maintain Kamos' defense forces, he sent a letter from the Memphis, which was the northern part of Cairo, into the areas of what is today called Nubia. He sent it to the Kushite king and explained to them, look, we are having a problem with the Egyptians, and what we think that is in the best interest of us both is that you send us troops now. And if you do, we will be able to put down this, insurrection, and eventually we can, keep business as usual. But what Kamos did was he intercepted the letter. It never reached the Kushite king. Kamos actually crushed the Nubians and turned his troops and forces south and went and crushed the Nubians. And just out of this particular exchange, it showed one thing to me inherently, and that is that the relationships that we see in historical documentation is not as always cut and dry as we think they are. And it's important that we do the follow-up information. What I'm going to do is now, I'm going to have to end right now because the time is up and it's getting late. But most of all, I want to give the Temple Now church and organization, a degree of thanks, most of all for giving me this opportunity. Anybody else that really wants to go into more detail of this subject matter, we gave trips to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts just 2 weeks ago. to deal with this subject matter. We also give trips to the Smithsonian and various other, what we would call public institutions and facilities that we have to make ourselves available to. But most of all, that we could become more knowledgeable and more aware of what these particular, areas of concentration have to offer for us. But most of all, that we become the custodians of our own history. I want to thank everybody for giving me this chance, and most of all, I want to make sure that everybody take time when it comes down to study and the research. Do not read fast, read very slow. Take times to understand and consume the information, but most of all, be clear about what you read. Thank you.
Brother Trust Graham, let's give him a hand. Brother Trust, wait a minute, brother, let me explain something. Did you all enjoy what you heard? Let me hear it. Did you enjoy it? Would you like to have part 2? Would you like to have the brother back again? All right. Brother Trust Graham, we would like to have you back next month.
No problem.
All right, and we're going to continue on with part 2. Yes, thank you very much. Moving right along, one of the honors, as we said, we've been saying this all week, we are so very honored to have our elder with us. It's one thing like the young people coming along, Professor Simmons says that this who will be taking his place, but as we as African people, it is a wonderful thing because we listen to our elders and we gain the knowledge and the wisdom, and that way we be able to know where we are going in the future. And an amen go right there. Right now, let us stand and welcome with a Revelations Now African welcome to our elder, Professor Dr. William Mackey.
What time is it?
I don't know.
Get my clothes over there.
Everybody got to have the tools to work with.
Another one.
Right.
My nail holes. Thank you.
All right. Here you go. Help yourself.
Hotep, y'all.
Hotep.
All right. As I spoke earlier with Sister Hepsat, who invited me here, if you look at your program, thank you. Ain't that my pen you done ripped me off for me?
No. That's my pen.
Okay, yeah, I got 3. No, that's all right. Because I rips off pens. It's dangerous to leave a pen around me.
All right, let me get this out your way. Okay.
If you look at your program, you'll see that my topic was in our involvement, meaning us as children of Africa. And as I explained to her, as with Brother Graham, and I agree with the young brother because he's right, we have been programmed in this culture to look for quick fixes.
Well,
one of the young brothers earlier said, and I like the term, and I'll appropriate anything that sounds good. He says, yeah, a microwave society. Right? You stick it in the microwave for 5 seconds, and you took it out and it's done. And I still don't know how it works, and I avoid the microwaves because I'm convinced that somewhere down the line it's going to be triple cancer someplace down there, right? And I can't prove it. Watch this. But this is very true. Now, and I preface this because I want to say something to you. I explained to them that when we talk about a subject, wars and our involvement, that's like almost going back and trying to find the beginning of time.
well,
When have we as a people not been involved?
all right.
So what I suggested with the agreement of the powers that be here, that I would take this lecture in the same connection as Brother Graham, as an introductory overview.
All right.
Because we've got a lot of material to cover.
Help yourself.
And don't even try to fool me, because I know you don't know it, because I only know a little bit of it. So what I'm going to suggest that you do, if you're serious, and I know you are, to purchase these tapes. Take them home, go over them, play them back and forth. It's no sin to not know something. It's only a sin to pretend you know what you don't know.
Right.
Make notes. When I come back in the future, if the good Lord's willing, the creek don't rise, you then will be in a position to ask for more details and stuff that I'll only be able to touch on. You'll be in a better position to ask intelligent questions. In the meantime, you will also be able to go out and look for books and research on your own. I can't stress this too importantly. No matter how much we know, which is little enough, true scholarship and true learning means that ultimately the student must teach him or herself. Nobody teaches you anything. And do not kid yourself. The best that the best teacher can do is to help you open your mind. You decide what you're going to learn, and it is a lifetime process. I will share with you an anecdote which supposedly was said by Euclid, the geometrician or mathematician, as we would say, to the king of Alexander, who had hired him to tutor the crown prince in geometry. And the crown prince was dumb. He just couldn't get it. He couldn't understand an isosceles triangle from an equilateral triangle, a right angle, a 45-degree angle. It was all, to use the phrase, Greek to him. The king became very upset with Euclid. And he called him in for a conference and said, "Look, old man, I don't understand this. Why the hell isn't my son, the crown prince, learning this discipline? After all, he has royal blood in his veins, and he is the crown prince. He's going to rule over this whole kingdom one day. What is your problem? Why can't you teach him?" Euclid looked him in the eye and said, "Your Majesty, there is no such thing as a royal road to mathematics." The prince was dumb. He could have studied 1,000 years. He could have had royal blood in the excess of 500 million gallons. It would not have helped. Even if he had the basic intelligence, did not have the intellectual curiosity, nor the discipline. Being royal, he had the time. How often do we say, "I would like to study that, but I ain't got the time"? "Professor Mackey, my God, how do you know so much?" "I ain't got the time." Oh, you make the time for those things you want to learn. If they're giving that big annual dance, you know, where everybody's going to step out there and you want them threads to be seen, you make the time to get that extra money to get them, don't you? You want that Mercedes? Huh? You want that BMW? Root hog, Darpo pig. But you get that. So we wait for those things we want. When it comes to the things that somehow, particularly for us, that are the greatest riches there are, knowledge of self, which are prerequisites for us to move on to talk about liberation. There's no point putting the cart before the horse. Knowledge is the key. Knowledge is the key. And when you look at what has happened to us in the last 500 years, it means that the first step we've got to do is lift the veil, the fogs of ignorance. Too long we have allowed other people to define us. One of the things that we've been programmed to do, if somebody black tries to offer something, we run like a thief. You know how many times I watched somebody come to that door as the program was going on here and look inside and turn around and got in the wind? Tonight, 15 different people came up to the door, looked inside, and started to listen. and something said, Charlie said to them, that ain't for you, man. And they're gone. Now, if they run out in the streets and one of them racist cops get on their head, they make a beeline back here and say, y'all come save me, because they is after us. That's the programming. So what I would like you to do, if you're serious, get copies of these tapes and go over them. High tech will serve anybody. There's no point in screaming about how the man uses TV or the media. The media is neutral. Nobody white put this equipment up here. We did. Most of it came from Japan. We can use it as we want to. It can be a tool to help liberate us. It can be something to entertain us, which does nothing for us, or we can allow the enemy to have it and use it to crack us over the head. But some of us wouldn't even spend the $4 or $5 for the tape. We have no problem buying a tape of something that don't mean nothing, because that's the way we're programmed. Our budgets would not allow us to buy a videotape. The brother Yusuf, where are you? He's gone? But you do what you have to do. We have to learn to use these techniques for ourselves. As much as I think I know, project yourselves back 50 years. And I'm a college student, but I'm a college student with all of this high-tech equipment around. I can take these Walkman that some of you use to blow your brains out, to boom. I can bring that into a classroom or lecture hall like we're doing now. I can set that in there, and I can tape all of those lectures. At my leisure, I can sit down and learn them. I would have moved the world. Because you can only split yourself so many ways in a day. I'm taking the time to impress this upon you because I want you to understand it is just as easy to pick up good habits as it is to pick up bad ones. It's only a matter of motivation. There's no way that nobody's going to perform a prefrontal lobotomy on our heads and pour the knowledge in. It don't work that way. And she is a hard task mistress. Now then, therefore I would ask you, if you're serious, whenever these tapes are ready, to get them, study them, make notes, and it's going to take, and I'll try to put the time in. I've got some writing to do, a couple articles for Dr. Clark. But we will come back and we will deal with this in depth. So I'm asking you indulgence, because I'll have to skip over certain things. If we had 30 hours that you could sit here and I had the knowledge of this one subject, we would only have scratched the surface. Is that clear, y'all? So, to begin, take the notes, question me whenever it is that we come back. There'll be other things that come in, but this is a good policy to do with all of these lectures. Because I know we're arrogant. We think, yeah, I understood everything. But we can't understand everything. Some things I have to go over 2 or 3 times. That is why one has to, for example, and this is not to impress you unduly, I have 20 books on the Crimean War alone. I have about 10 books on the 1857 rebellion in India. God knows how many books on the American Civil War and the Revolutionary War, etc., etc. And you know what I found? And I'm sure those of you who do any research have found the same thing. No 2 of them books agree on everything. You must always remember that every historian comes with a point of view. And when you're dealing with lying historians, you cannot assume that these people are going to sit still and let us put in a quote-unquote multicultural curriculum into the school. As Professor Simmons said earlier, they didn't build the system, roll over and play dead for us. For us to gab, say, how could they do that? That's what you do if you want power. I'm going to tie in. Remember the sister talked about how they brought Larry Davis in chains to his mother's funeral? And we all say, how could they do that? And that was an attempt to humiliate him. Let us use our heads. That ain't what it was about at all. What it was about was F-E-A-R on the part of them. And this is an old story because our whole situation is one of war on many levels. Anytime 100 policemen have to come in and escort one man in a wheelchair, in chains around his neck and his feet with a helicopter overhead, what the hell are they saying? Let them do it 1,000 times a day. And I will say right on, because some of us ain't gonna learn no other way. But if that man dangle his personality in front of you every day in ways you can't get around, you learn. Case in point, most of us 2 years ago never heard anybody by the name of Rodney King. Huh? The name is known all over the world now, not because of who Rodney King is or was, but because of the circumstances surrounding a racist incident which high tech, mind you, dictated where they didn't know it, that the whole process was done on videotape. Suppose the guy hadn't been there with the machine, or suppose he didn't even care or didn't take the machine out, or it hadn't been working. You follow where I'm coming from? But because of that, a lot of placid Negroes who thought they were making it. I have this job in the private sector. I am the third person in line for vice president in charge of pencil sharpeners in my firm. But when you watch that and you watch these people hit one human being 56 times in 83 seconds, and the officer in charge testifies, which I have taped, I just handed it to a brother tonight, to the effect, when I asked, why did you do this? I saw that he was on PCB and he was impervious to pain. The lab test showed that the man was not on PCB. When the district attorney pointed that out, why did you then keep beating him if he were impervious to pain? We felt that if we beat him long enough, at some point he would feel the pain. Sound familiar? And that's the best PhD and real education of the world you can get. And the rest of the white folks took them out and put them out in Simi Valley and sat up there and ignored all the visual evidence and said, they ain't committed no crime, we pay them to keep niggas in line, quote unquote, by any means necessary. Now I would submit that that's the kind of evidence that whether you like it or not, you can't get around that. You know, those of us who are always so prone to say, well, he must have done something, or they say he had a gun, or he must have did something because they wouldn't have done him. Boop, that's gone. High tech eliminated that. Now you got to take a stand, one way or the other, right? You must take a stand one way or the other. So in terms of what we are looking at here, when we talk about wars and our involvement in the society that we live in, we are at war 24 hours a day, whether we know it or not, or whether we recognize it or not. The problem has been, I would argue, that it has not been in the interest of this society to see African people as warriors. But we must also remember that Western society is psychotic. And when you're psychotic, that means you're not rational. So when we look at the history of African people, and particularly in the wars of Europe and etc., we find that one has to be almost crazy to try to figure out what is going on most of the time. So much of it has been hidden. And the reason it has been hidden because of, as my esteemed colleague will tell you, the concept of modern Eurocentric racism. And when you combine that racism with the inferiority complex, which is why I mentioned Larry Davis, because you can see the absurdity of 100 people bringing you in chains. Right, where are you going to go? You're crippled in a wheelchair, but he's probably got a secret engine in there. And he's going to do a Batman job. But it tells us something that we need to know. It tells us also why you're not going to look at real history. It tells us why an Arthur Schlesinger Jr., for example, can call a Dr. Leonard Jeffries a charlatan and non-scholar, while at the same time he writes a book purporting to be a biography of Andrew Jackson, 500 pages that gets a Pulitzer Prize, and didn't have 2 sentences on the Indians, which was the background of Andrew Jackson's whole life, was built on fighting wars against Indians and us. Where is it in the history books? This is the same Arthur Schlesinger Jr. who in a 1,200-page book, supposedly a history of the Kennedy administration, which got him his 2nd Pulitzer Prize, and we shouldn't be surprised by that because the folks that give the Pulitzer, Mr. Pulitzer, look like Schlesinger Jr., and the committee that hands out the prize look like Arthur Schlesinger Jr. Thank you. You said it, I didn't. This book, written in 1969, and I love it. So you got to go down a lot of roads, like the brother was saying. Can't ignore European history. It's very important. This man had the nerve to write in this book on a chapter on Africa. You can check it out. It's out there in the library. He said, quote, "Until John Kennedy came to the presidency, there was no interest in the United States in Africa, even among black Americans." That's a quote. I think it's page 9 something. You could check it through. Now, you know what the man did with 1 sentence? Or let's give him a paragraph. He wiped out Paul Robeson, the Council on African Affairs. He wiped out Marcus Garvey, Henry Sylvester Williams, George Padmore. I'm just talking about some of the Caribbean brothers and sisters, right? Edward Wilmot Blyden, Webb Du Bois, Hasty Crawford, Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and of course the UNIA. Now he's writing this in 1969. Go check me out. The blacks in America had no interest in Africa. Nobody in the United States was interested in Africa. That's in a book called 1,000 Days by one Arthur Schlesinger Jr., which brought him his 2nd Pulitzer Prize. Now the committee that examined that book for accuracy looked in it and saw nothing wrong with it. Because fundamentally, you see, children, they don't see us until it is necessary to see us. When we go back to what they love to call the ancient times, we know, as I said in another connection, if you attend Sandhurst, which is the British Military Academy, or Saint-Cyr, which is the French Military Academy, or West Point, or the Institut de Kragenheim, German, they have required section on guerrilla warfare. And in all four of these places, there are others, but there are two, the battles of two generals are going to be there. Or let's say two wars. Hannibal's crossing the Alps, Toussaint Louverture, Henri Christophe, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and the Haitian Revolution. Because the Haitian Revolution was the first example of what we would call modern guerrilla warfare. Fidel Castro and all the others, Salvatore Allende, this was the role model. There were others. The tactics of Shaka Zulu are studied at Sandhurst. Why? As I said earlier, someone said, well, how do you see Shaka Zulu? You're going to discuss him. I said, only within the context of the struggle for African history. I take nothing from Brother Zulu, but they never told you anything about Shaka Zulu. Shaka Zulu, as far as standard historiography is concerned, it is something that has come for us in the last 20 years. Would you agree, brother? And why did it come? Because we, let's take credit for it, us, went and dug it up and put it out there and they could no longer avoid it. Once you come up with something, then they play the other game, switch tactics. The magician now, pointing, Shaka Zulu, Shaka Zulu. Shaka Zulu covered only one period of the struggle against European imperialism in 19th century Africa. Doesn't mean that he wasn't a genius. But that struggle against European encroachment, particularly the British and the French, covered most of the 17th, 18th, and came through the 19th century. Sekou Touré's grandfather, Samurai Touré, and what we now call Guinea. That has not been covered by the Western historians. Y'all follow where I'm coming from? Setsueo. (1896). Can anybody tell me why Benito Mussolini decided to invade Ethiopia in 1935? Can anybody tell me why? Yes, sir. By who? Menelik II. Thank you, sir. I didn't see my student friend there. Good to see you. Thank you. Is that clear? In 1896, Menelik II and an army that the Ethiopians outnumbered 10-1 rubbed the troops the nose in the dirt and chased their butts out. When you read African history, children, you got to look for the stuff that we've done to see through. Am I lying, sir?
Not lying.
All right? Now, watch the racism. The rest of the European imperial powers, England, France, Germany, and of course the rest of the United States, ridiculed the Italians. Marshal Badoglio them and said you couldn't even beat a bunch of barefoot niggers. That's a direct quote. This stuck in their craws. Huh? 40 years later, they came back. And this time, they came back with the collusion of the other racist Western powers. The League of Nations said, we have a treaty says that we will not help any belligerent powers. Therefore, nobody would sell Ethiopia arms. Mr. Mussolini had used the period between World War I and the Ethiopian War to buy all the arms he wanted from anywhere. This is documented. The Ethiopian Air Force had 3 planes. A brother originally from Trinidad who lived here for years, some of you never heard of him, Colonel Hubert Fauntleroy Julian, one of the pioneer black aviators. He was flying planes when Colonel Charlie Lindbergh and others says that non-white folks couldn't fly planes. That's right, that's him, the Black Eagle. He went to Ethiopia. There were many volunteers from New York, from the islands all over. Oh yeah, that's our history. And the great liberal Roosevelt said, what? Anybody, any American citizen that goes to fight on either side of this war would do what, sir? Thank you. I didn't say it, you did. In the meantime, you had Americans flying for Mussolini, lost no citizenship. You had white Americans flying for the African-German Eagle Corps, no problem. They flew for the fascist Spanish Phalanges, no problem. Your government didn't know about this. Now then, that's just one example of stuff from our time, from this morning, that we have been largely kept ignorant of. And if this is true for what is now, what do we find when we go back a few thousand years? When we look at the way the semantics, that's why they're constantly renaming things. The Hannibal, or the Carthage, Cartagena, the French said of Hannibal, they changed into something called Phoenicians. Why did they have to make these Africans Phoenicians? Because that which we call the Greek alphabet ain't come from Greece. Any accurate dictionary, encyclopedia, you look up the word A. Don't take my word for it. And it'll tell you it's a symbolic thing back in the ancient Phoenician, but they're about to tell you that ancient Phoenicia was exactly where Tunis, Morocco, and Libya is today. But as my grandma said, the geography ain't changed, but you got to know them things. When we look at how the ancients saw these people, they knew who they were looking at. Don't take my word. Read Herodotus, the premier Greek historian. At least he's premier when he's saying something that they agree with. When he says something about Ethiopians, which enhances us, then suddenly he was a fantasist or a fantabulous. But he tells us in his first book, the happiest people of all are the Ethiops. And he used that term generically because the word Ethiop in ancient Greek literally meant burnt faces. The land, the people of burnt sun. He couldn't have been talking about Germans. He couldn't have been talking about Scandinavians or Franks. And he said, they have the most prosperous and the happiest lands, and their rulers rule with compassion and wisdom. And this Herodotus writing when? Almost 3,000 years before the so-called BCE Christian era. Herodotus had no reason to lie. When you look at the fabulous Homer, talk about African warriors, what does Homer tell us? He tells us that at the Battle of Troy, we now know from the excavations of Slimane that Troy, of course, did exist. And he tells us that Memnon, who was the friend of Agamemnon, that after Troy fell, he was an Ethiopian prince. And he described him as being of burnt complexion and tight, crinkly hair. This is the Attic Greek translation. Don't take my word for it. Go study languages. You're going to need them. Because people can translate and tell you anything. Thank you. There are 4 authentic Countum translations of Homer's Iliad, and they all differ in very important respects. They can't even agree on the names of people, but yet they're called historians. But the word historia that the Greeks used didn't have the meaning as today. It meant what we would call a fable or story. Sometimes it was told to illustrate a point. And where did they learn this from? From our folk tales. As the brother before said, all you have to do, it don't even take too much analysis. The most famous of all the so-called Greek fabulists is a gentleman by the name of Aesop, A-E-S-O-P, which is one spelling. Another spelling would be E-T-H-I-O-P. When I spell it that way, it tells you where the man came from, right? Huh? In other words, just like people today would say, the German or the Frenchman, they looked at him, and because he looked like us, they called him the Ethiopian. It's more than internal evidence. When we look at those, quote, fables of Aesop, what kind of animals does he talk about? Huh? He talks about lions. Are lions indigenous to Europe? Yes or no? Lions are indigenous to one area of this world, Africa. You find no tigers in Africa. You find tigers in Asia. Edgar Rice Burroughs obviously didn't know that. He had Tarzan riding a tiger up down me, right? And Hollywood sold 1 million of his plays. So when you look at those fables of Aesop, compare them with the Anansi stories, which have come down to us in Jamaica and the islands, and the so-called Joel Chandler Harris Br'er Rabbit stories in the Southland where I come from. Run them all together and guess what you got? It all goes back home to Mother Africa. Because when you look at those animals, some of them like rabbits and hares you find everywhere. But there's a whole lot of animals that he used symbolically in there that you don't find nowhere outside of Africa. We know that Aesop was captured. He had been a soldier and was captured on an expedition to Greece. We know this now after looking at what they call the latest Hellenist translation. That has only come about because our scholars, you know, ain't no secret about learning a foreign language. If we were enslaved by everybody, we spoke every language and still do. Most of my people I know, particularly in the West Indies and whatnot, are all bilingual. We even come up with variations of our own called Creole or whatever you want to. So now when we look at that period, let's look at this warrior Hannibal quickly. The Romans knew he was black, and they had no problem with that. Their problem was, how the hell do we beat his butt? This warrior, using most of his troops, came from where the brother was here talking about before, Nubia. Did you all know that? Now, obviously, you don't find elephants along the littoral coast of Africa. You don't find elephants there. You have to go into what they used to call darkest Africa. It's very interesting how they changed semantics. Up until we started becoming independent, it was always darkest Africa. Now they've modified that to, oh, there's a black Africa, and I don't know what the other Africa says, but once again playing them games. And you have to watch them things, as my grandma used to say. So here you've got this man coming across the Alps with 4 regiments of elephants, with the riders and the herdsmen on them. Who trained these elephants? Egyptians? No. No. Nubians, Sudanese, and what we now call the Zimbabweans. The tradition is still in Central Africa today. You don't have to take my word. Among the Tuareg people, you still find the tradition, an elephant training tradition and a camel training tradition. Now, you see that. But here was this man who left Africa. The Romans took control with their navy of the Mediterranean Sea and cut Hannibal Barca off from his base. For 20 years, Hannibal never saw Africa again, you know. For 20 years, this man beat the best generals that Rome had. Now, obviously, you don't use the same soldiers for 20 years, do you, Brother Youssef? So how did he do it? Very simple. Brilliant general he was. He made common cause with all the people that Rome had rubbed the nose in the dirt. The Illyrians, the Spaniards, some of the Germans, the Celts. And they came to his army in droves. They had no problem with dealing with this black man, and he was described by Scipio Africanus, his arch enemy, again, as being a very dark man. And here they come with this their stuff again. We didn't just come to Europe. Go look at Rome. To this day, the Italians have a saying that everything south of Rome is Africa. Why do you think the Neapolitans and the Sicilians are on our case so much here? Whether we like it or not, you know, they are cousins. Sicily, Sardinia, all of those Mediterranean islands. Check the history. Since time immemorial, they have been the stepping stone for conquerors from Africa and Asia going into Europe and coming back. Now, soldiers did not usually in the old world carry women with them. Soldiers are notorious womanizers. Soldiers do not live celibate lives. And anywhere soldiers stay more than one night, there's going to be a change in the complexions if the soldiers have different complexions. You may like it or not like it, but these are facts. Europeans are the only folks that I know who are crazy enough to assume that they can repeal a fundamental law of nature. To skip ahead a bit, in World War II, in Asia, out in Indonesia, the Marshall Islands, such as you know, there you're looking at brown people much like ourselves. The Americans then told them, "We are designating you as white." Told the chiefs, "We don't want you letting none of your women go out with them niggers, because you are now honorary Europeans and they're niggers." The chiefs didn't understand it. The end result was there are a lot of semi-blacks and then they're running around the Caribbean today. We move ahead a few centuries from Brother Hannibal, and of course the only way the Romans got to him is his troops got old, he became partly blind, betrayals in the ranks, couldn't get no contact back home. I guess the people back in Carthage forgot he ever been there. But ultimately, Rome prevailed. But this one black man, for over 20 years, let me put this, you want to put this in perspective. Sometimes we need to go to the people. Italian mothers today, if their children are doing something that they feel that they need to threaten them, chastise them not to do, they will yell at them, "Annibalo al porto." Hannibal is at the gates. That's now. You better mind me, Hannibal is waiting outside and the kid is supposed to turn around, right? Today the Italians honor him and his father with names we don't recognize. Annibalo for Hannibal and Amilcare for Hamilcar the father. You can't pay no higher accolade to a conqueror than to name your children after him. So the Romans knew exactly who he was. We come down a little nearer to our own time. For 300 years, the Romans, as bad as they were, had tried to conquer the British Isles. And they had failed to do it. The last person that put up a bid was a woman by the name of Queen Boadicea. She played the same role in English history as Zenobia played in African history, the African queen who ran off all the other lady that skips my mind now in Indian history. Oh yeah, we've had these warrior queens, you know. There was nothing against them. Only when the Europeans started changing history in the modern times. But suffice it to say, finally, in 54 B, the era of the so-called Christian era, after Julius Caesar, the best Roman generals could not invade or conquer Britain. They finally got smart and they sent to Africa once more a gentleman by the name of Septimius Severus. Black man, mother was a Nubian, father Sudanese, was in command of all the Roman army in North Africa. Claudius, the emperor, decided to make one more try at conquering England. And because he considered himself a bit of a military historian, he decided that the man in his army to do it was Septimius Severus. Why? Because Severus was a walking encyclopedia on the tactics of Hannibal Barca. And what do you think that Mr. Severus did? They ain't gonna tell you them things either, as my grandma would say. Said, no problem. Y'all been going about it the wrong way. You coming with phalanxes and all the rest of this stuff. That ain't how it's gonna work. He went and got himself 10,000 Nubian elephant cavalry. Did y'all hear what I said? I'm talking about the year 54 AD. 10,000 black cavalrymen, elephant cavalry. Landed them off the boat from France down by Dover. And as the chronicler says, when the English looked up and saw these huge elephants and these jet black people sitting on top, it was a brand new ball game. Within 8 months, the battle was over. It was Septimius Severus' African cavalry that made the possibility of Hadrian's Wall being built. Because if it hadn't been for the cavalry, there would have been no Hadrian, or no wall across that separated England from Scotland. The Romans were never able to conquer Scotland because the Scots to this day are crazy. Now, I need to pose a question here, if I may. What y'all think happened to them 10,000 African troops? There's no record that said that after England was conquered, that they put them back on the boats and shipped them back to Africa. That's correct. They stayed there as occupation troops. So these same Englishmen are so-called pure-blooded Anglo-Saxon Ku Kluxers. You see what I'm telling you about? You got to know them things and analyze who talking about they don't want no you know what, contaminating their you know what. We've been there, y'all, almost 2,000 years. Now, we have the word for this That's why I tell you, you got to go down a lot of roads. You have the word for this, the witness for this, of no other scholar or gentleman of eminence than William Pitt the Younger, Prime Minister of England, during the argument in Parliament over the abolishing of the African slave trade, not slavery, mind you, in the latter half of the 19th century. People such as Thomas Clarkson, George James Fox, William Wilberforce, among others, was trying to work to get this trade stopped. They got a lot of help because British commercial interests decided they had got all they could get out of it. But in the course of arguing this bill, Wilberforce, who was a close friend of William Pitt the Younger, who, as you know, became Prime Minister of England at age 21, he called upon Pitt, who had shown some evidence of being in favor of outlawing slave trade. He asked Pitt to use his eloquence. Would he get up in Parliament and help defend the anti-slavery position? William Pitt agreed to. And in a book called The Speeches of William Pitt, that speech is in there. You ain't going to find it easy, but go to them libraries there. And Pitt, in what they considered one of the great speeches of his career, got up and accused his fellow English parliamentarian of pure hypocrisy. And he said this: "It is the height of the ridiculous and utter folly and hypocrisy for us to stand up here arguing the pros and cons of African slavery when any schoolboy," and they used to use that word, "who is at all familiar with English history knows that Claudius brought 10,000 black troops on elephant troops here who helped conquer England, and the blood of Africa run through some of the best blood of England." That's a quote. Now, I'm not bragging about sharing my blood with English blood, but that's not what we're here for. We're talking about wars and our involvement in it. And you're looking at what I'm saying is a long story. Another part of that, because so many things was happening during the slave period, particularly the 19th century was a horror thing. You had the European imperialists in what they themselves called the scramble for Africa. Think of that. Everybody's running, trying to grab a piece. To the extent that Chancellor Bismarck of Germany called a conference, which they call the Berlin Conference, 1883-1884. All of the thieves, the vultures that was pecking on Mother Africa, called this conference and says, "You people are being stupid." Now, the Germans at that point was looking to grab a foothold. As I told you, the Italians, they came late. We have to look at that history. Why did the Italians come late? Because Italy did not become a country itself until the last part of the 19th century. Part of it belongs to Austria, part of it the Habsburg Empire, another piece was this, Trieste was this, the Kingdom of Eastern Sicily. It was a mess up until the time of Giuseppe Garibaldi and Camille Cavour, who became what they later called the George Washington, that brought Italy together as a nation. Germany was only 100 years ahead because it was Frederick the Great that took all them little German principalities, the Prussians and whatnot, and welded a nation out of them. Now you might say, "Professor Mackey, why is this important?" It's very important. Because this will explain to you why the English and the French predominantly and the Dutch had got a head start on eating on us. because they had had their their wars of nationalism 2 or 3 centuries ahead. So therefore, when the time came, when the high tech came to reach out and chop up the ill-gotten gains of Spain, they were in a prime position to move. One of the reasons that Germany, that Frederick the Great and the others decided we have to have one nation, we can't have all these little principalities running around here, prince this, count this, and all the rest of this, with a bit of territory as big as this auditorium. Because while we doing this, England and France is eating up niggers all over the place. And we want some. But you can't mount no army if the people in this row says, I'm a Brandenburger, not a German. And the ones in this row says, I'm an Upper Silesia, not a German. And the one over there says, Ich bin ein Berliner. Something has to happen to give these group of disparate elements a sense of oneness and national purpose. In other words, they were pretty much a lot like we as a people are today. I hated to sneak that in on you, but hey, if the shoe fits, tie it up. So once the Germans and the Italians got themselves together, the first step was, let's go get some colonies and build an empire. And where does one start? Mos and Mosetta. Now, Bismarck, after kicking the French in the teeth, thereby announcing that Germany was now a major power to be dealt with, decided that he would use this leverage to opt for a piece of Mother Africa. So when he called this conference in 1883, 1884, England, being slick, said, well, we don't know what he's going to do. He's a wild card. The French was scared to say no because he might march on Paris again. The Italians came along like the buzzards they were, you can quote me, hoping to pick up some of the scrap carrion after the big fat dude left off. And in effect, here's what Chancellor Otto von Bismarck said. The brother said before, the motherland is 12 million square miles. And still one of the most sparsely populated areas in the world. Something like 5 to 10 on the average per 100 square miles. I ain't even talking about natural resources. But I want you all to check that out when you listen to your tape. I want you to go and get, never mind the politics. When I come back, I'm going to insist on you having done some study on a physical geography of Africa. Because we better understand that. As I say, we're talking about liberation, this and that and the other. We don't even understand what we're fighting. I'm not telling all the people this. We have to understand this. And when you study the physical geography of Africa, when you study the rainfall, and you study the natural resources, the agriculture, there are many products in Africa that don't grow nowhere else, you know. There are many minerals that ain't nowhere else. Tungsten for one. Cobalt-3 for another. A large part of what goes into nuclear bomb, very critically, comes out of the soil of Africa. I'm not even talking about the more romantic stuff. Gold, diamonds. But they ain't about to tell you that. I beg your pardon? That's correct. Cobalt. And I want you, because when you study physical geography, what that does, are you all aware of that? It gives you layers. Instead of dealing with it, tell you about population, but it also show you where the natural resources, the oil and the minerals are. We better understand that if we're going to understand the nature of politics. As I said at Convent Avenue Baptist Church the other night, you got to look at all of it. The most important thing is economics. So Bismarck said, listen, what are you Frenchmen fighting the Englishmen and the Dutch for? This is insane. There ain't as many white folks as there are niggers, his word. And Africa is, he says, look at this huge African cake. You know what I said? Look at this huge African cake. There's plenty of it here for all of us. There's enough of this African cake here for us to eat it. Oh, thank you, brother. And have it running out our ears. And since we don't have the numbers on them, if we keep fighting among ourselves, at some point we're going to become weak enough and they'll just push us off. That's Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of Germany, speaking in 1884. Now, all I want for peace is a little piece of East Africa. Y'all got plenty more. The Cameroon, you ain't doing nothing there. Yeah. A few other little pieces there, little tidbits hanging off there. I've already got a foothold in Azania, which they call South Africa, because of the Boers and all of them Germans who have been going there. Peters, who went in there and started laying out stuff. I love the way these Europeans just go and say, what's the day? Today is Tuesday? Okay, this is PS 175. You don't believe me? You know the island in the Caribbean called Dominica? What does that word mean in Spanish? Sunday. Right? And the reason it's called Dominica, because that was the day that Columbus stumbled on top of it. Yeah, he stumbled on top of it on Domingo, and he said, today this is the Dominican version. Okay? Very simple. If this is Tuesday, it must be Belgium. 30,000 people looking at you who've been living there for 30,000 years. Do you go over and say, excuse me, ma'am, what y'all call this place? Do I come and ask you that? Now that's one part of the role played in the 19th century. On the other part, let me dump this at you. It was during the 19th century that England decided that being an island nation, they didn't have the population, so the way that they were going to have to control and protect the empire and look out for its imperial interests was to have a navy second to none. Now, having this navy second to none, particularly after the Battle of Trafalgar during the Napoleonic Wars, after Nelson, quote, won the Battle of Trafalgar. I love the way, and they got that big column up there, Trafalgar Square. And they're all proud of that in London, and I say to myself, I wonder if Lord Horatio Nelson would have foregone winning the Battle of Trafalgar and kept his life. Because the French iced him, you know, one of them cannonballs went and knocked him in the middle. They ain't never found all his body. But when the smoke cleared, the Union Jack was up there. Right? Lord Nelson, how many of you are aware of the fact throughout the 19th century, over 40% of the British Navy was us?
Say what?
You heard me. Throughout the 19th century, over 40% of the British Navy was us.
My.
They impressed us from Africa. They impressed us from England itself. Oh yeah, we had a presence there, and I ain't even talking about the ones that came with Severus. And the huge big place was the Caribbean, or what we call the West Indies. Now, how do we know this?
All right, teach, my brother, teach.
Here's a book I know y'all don't like to spend money, but I got a couple of them up there. They're $20 a piece. It's called Color, Class, and the Victorians. English Attitudes to the Negro in the mid-19th century. And here this man has a whole thing documented about the black community there. We have been there since long before the slave trade. Now, you see, when you try to hide something, it is true that you know the truth shall make you free. How much more time do I have?
9:45.
10 minutes to 10.
Watch how people choke on their own shit. Not knowing that down the road that the crisis becomes an opportunity. All of the southern port cities during the slave period knew that so many blacks were in the British Navy and the Merchant Seamen and the French Navy Merchant Seamen that the Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Maryland, that would be Baltimore, etc., had laws, state laws on the book, you can check them out, that forbid black sailors to land foot, to set foot on the docks in these cities. Is that clear? Now, one does not, see, you don't need a law against murder until somebody kills somebody. You don't anticipate that you're a murderer until you kill somebody. So now, why would all of these southern port cities find it, these states, 5 states, find it necessary to put a law on the books that said no black sailor could set foot legally on that soil? Obviously, the ships that was making the port of call, both merchant and navy ships, were loaded with Moses. And I don't have to speculate that, because in this book, Dr. Lorimer documents about 20 cases where black English sailors were arrested in Norfolk and other places. As a matter of fact, New York for 20 years had a law that said no foreign black sailor could land here. I don't know why y'all should be surprised. It's just the difference from down south and up south, right? But Lorimer documents these cases here, and I don't have the time to read, but as I said, I have a couple of these books, because the stuff here you can't get. Man, this is published, of course, in England.
What's the name?
Sir? The name is Color, Class, and the Victorians by Douglas A. Lorimer, Lorimer. And the subtitle is English Attitudes to the Negro in the Mid-19th Century. And there was a period when England and the United States, before, I'm talking now before the Civil War, almost had a confrontation over the arrest and imprisonment of these black English sailors. Now you see, the standard history don't even let you know. But we had in London alone, in the middle of the 18th century, we had over 50,000 black folks living in London, 50,000. Here, this is a rare book to find, but if you can find it, it's called London Life in the 18th Century by Mary Dorothy George. A shuddering impression of the brutalized life led by the masses. And this is how they treated white folks. And I want to give you 2 little excerpts if I have time, so you understand that. Here's a segment here on immigrants. And they talk about, she talks about the large amount of blacks living in England here Page 134. Immigrants and immigrants. Negroes in London, she's talking about the middle of the 18th century. It's around 1750 and height of slavery. Negroes in London were immigrants of a class apart, and their position must have been strangely friendless and anomalous. They did not live in colonies with their countrymen, some of whom had been brought to England, had run away, or been deserted by their masters. Did you know that? Don't lie, because I can tell by the look on your face the answer is no, because you weren't supposed to know it. Others had come from the West Indies as stowaways or refugees to seek freedom in England, often to find starvation. Is that clear? Their great number in the 18th century has been little commented on, almost like invisible people. In the famous Somerset case, which I will deal with shortly, of 1771-72, it was stated that there were then, according to the most exact estimate that could be made, about 14,000 slaves in the country. And Lord Mansfield accepted the number as between 14 and 15,000. That does not include the 50-some thousand of blacks who were not slaves. Now watch the gimmick these people play. A large proportion of these were in London, where they lived chiefly in the eastern and riverside parishes. From time to time, Negroes appeared at the Old Bailey charged with petty thefts. And in 1780, one was tried as a Gordon rioter. This was the bread riot led by Lord George Gordon, a working class people in London. Sir John Fielding protested against the practice of bringing these poor creatures over from the West Indies. And here's what, oh yeah, right? Us superior islanders, here's what your masters did to you. And this is Fielding talking, the man that founded the London police. Quote, the immense confusion that has arose in the families of merchants and other gentlemen who have estates in the West Indies from the great number of Negro slaves they have brought into this kingdom deserve the most serious attention. Many of these gentlemen have either at a vast expense caused some of their blacks to be instructed in the necessary qualifications of a domestic servant, or else have purchased them after they have been instructed. They then bring them to England as cheap servants, having no right to wages. They no sooner, that is the slave no sooner arrive here, that they put themselves on a footing with other servants, become intoxicated with liberty, grow refractory, and either by persuasion or others or from their own inclination begin to expect wages according to their own opinion of their merits. And as there are already a great number of black men and women who have made themselves so troublesome and dangerous to the families who brought them over as to get themselves discharged, these either enter into societies and make it their business to corrupt and dissatisfy the mind of every black slave that comes to England. Hey, brother, let me pull your coat. You see, we did stick together when we have to, but you have to know them tame. And they ain't gonna go tell you what you do. Anybody can find a copy of this book. Come back and tell me. Find it, all right? Oh, this was published in 1927. I don't know, because I would pick up every copy I had to give to somebody. This copy I've had 30 years. Mary Dorothy George. But yes. Now, another section of this book, which is very good on level, and they also tell you about what some of the masters, no, this one ain't for sale, that's mine. They tell you about what some of the masters did. There were several cases where masters were brought to court in London and various other places, Lichfield, on charge of having abandoned their slave. And you would say, what? Abandoned the slave? Yes. Sometimes a slave would be brought to England and would get sick. And the master would look at it, and if the slave was seriously sick, he would take it to the doctor, and if he decided that it would cost more than he wanted to pay for the slave to get well, he'd throw him out in the streets. The Somerset case, which I think you need to hear. That's correct. Lord Mansfield. And this came before Admiralty, because this slave, Somerset, James Somerset, had been brought to England by his master from Jamaica. Somerset became seriously ill. The master threw him out in the streets. He thought to die. Some other black folks living in London came upon the brother, picked him up, nursed him back to health, found him a job working on the London docks. And one day, a few months or so later, they were strolling along, and who should come by in his carriage but his former master, who goes to the nearest policeman and says, seize that man, seize that nigger, the word he used, he is my property. Somerset was seized. Thomas Clarkson, George James Fox, William Wilberforce raised funds and decided to make a test case at it. The case was finally heard before the Chief Justice Lord Mansfield. Sir? Yes, Black Britannia. Lord Mansfield tried and heard the case. The position that Somerset's lawyers took was that slavery had no legal status in England, and that once Somerset or any other slave set foot down on British soil, England proper, he had a right to be free. And in the Somerset case, Lord Mansfield upheld this defense and set James Somerset free. And another case coming in 1798 was a different story, but this was the landmark case. Now we always had our grapevines. Okay. We always had our grapevines. And that word got around very quickly. So you had then, within the next few years, according to their records, you had cases of at least 5,000 escaped slaves from Barbados, from Jamaica and other places in the so-called English West Indies, stowing away on ships. And it was rather easy to do, since a lot of the sailors on the ship were us. And they would get them to England, and immediately they would claim in terms of their freedom. Now what I've done, I've brought you up to an overview of the middle of the 19th century on one part. And I took it on this part because this is a part of the participation in wars and struggle that normally we are not even made a part of. As I said, Lord Nelson, most trusted sailors. Most of the gunners in the Royal Navy were black, because Lord Nelson had said that they were the most accurate gunners they had. Just about all the kitchen crews, the cooks, etc., on these ships was us. When we look, or take a new look at the word, and I haven't even touched on America.
You say that to the right?
Save it for next time.
And just part two.
Save it for part 2, 10 o'clock.
We are finished for this evening. Your time is up. Oh, my time is up, actually. Hopefully, I've whetted your appetite. Get these tapes The best is yet to come. And study them. Sir?
Let us stand for Professor Mackey.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, sir. Well, I'm going to do 2 more lectures. Because we have to do the 18th, the U.S., the American, the world situation, Africa, and then this period up to now.
All right.
Okay?
Next month.
Well, I ain't coming back in July. I'm going south to finish my research, and I got to do something. I can come back in August, but I can't do it in July. Y'all do it.
Do we want him back in August,
you asked
people?
the class, right.
All right. Do we want him back in August? All right. We're going to have Brother Mackey back here, and I'm charging each and every one of y'all tonight to bring at least 3 people, and let's pack this place for our elder. Let's give him another hand.
No, thank you.
I love you.
Thank you. Thank you.